Hi, everyone. I'm Vladimir Dutit. We are watching all the news happening in the United States and around the world. Check out these feeds behind me. These are feeds coming into the CBS News Broadcast Center from all of our stations and affiliates across the country. If it's happening out there, we're going to bring it to you live right here. Let's begin. With just 1 week until Election Day, Vice President Harris is making her closing argument with major addresses on the national mall. With a major address, just one, how she hopes to appeal to voters in that speech happening later today. And this hour, former President Donald Trump will hold a news conference from Mar-a-Lago as the fallout continues from that Madison Square Garden rally. We will bring you his remarks live. And Hezbollah has named a new leader after the death of its previous leader last month, what it could mean for the crisis in the Middle East. This is CBS News 24/7. All right, it's 1 week until Election Day, folks. Just 1 week. More than 40 million people have already cast early voting ballots. Meanwhile, Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump are making a final bid to voters. We're awaiting, actually, remarks from the former president. You were looking at a live shot from Mar-a-Lago where he's expected to speak. We'll bring you some of those remarks live in just a moment. He did rally some voters in Atlanta last night, calling for them to make their voices heard.
This election is a choice between whether we will have 4 more years of incompetence and failure, or whether or not we will begin the 4 greatest years in the history of our country.
We're going to keep you on camera as much as possible.
Our Jake Rosen is following the Trump campaign from Washington. So, Jake, here's the question. There are 300,000 eligible Puerto Rican voters in the state of Pennsylvania. Florida is home to one of the largest Puerto Rican communities outside of New York. Many are slamming the comment that was made at that rally at Madison Square Garden, which compared Puerto Rico to a floating island of garbage. I saw a headline from one of the leading newspapers in Puerto Rico, El Nuevo. They say, and it's a conservative newspaper. It is a right-of-center newspaper. The headline this morning on the front page is Harris. I know the Trump campaign has been trying to clean this up, although they seem to have gone silent in the last 24 hours. The question that everybody has, and if you know the former president better than anyone because you're covering the campaign, the question that we have is he going to apologize? Is he going to say that a mistake was made, that he doesn't support those comments? Because ultimately, the responsibility lies with him. What are you hearing about that?
We'll see what Donald Trump says at that Mar-a-Lago press conference today, and also later today in Allentown, Pennsylvania, which has a huge Latino population. Again, a critical one that both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump both need to try to and support those 300,000 voters all across the state. The Trump campaign has really said all along that it's these kinds of groups that they're targeting to make inroads with as we get closer to the election, but we have not seen an apology. As we know from just years of covering Donald Trump, that Trump does not often apologize, although his campaign has walked back and said that that joke does not fit into the view of the former president and the campaign. But again, we have to remember that he just said a couple minutes ago, too, to ABC News that he didn't know the comedian, again, trying to distance himself, and that he had not watched the remarks. So trying to push himself back a little bit from those, but we'll see if there's an explicit apology. I would probably expect it to come tonight in Allentown, or at least some kind of spin on what happened at Madison Square Garden on Sunday there versus in Mar-a-Lago.
Right. That is typically the fallback comment from the former president, that he doesn't know somebody or that he's not aware of what they said or what they did. But again, to quote Harry Truman, the buck stops here. And so it was his rally. Those were the people that he chose to speak on his behalf. He's also responded, Jake, as you know, to comparisons made to a 1939 pro-Nazi gathering that happened right there in Madison Square Garden. How's he pushing back on that?
Well, Donald Trump has rebuffed criticisms from Hillary Clinton, obviously former First Lady and former Secretary of State, in what she said, and also Tim Walz, who's Kamala Harris's running mate, both made those comparisons. Donald Trump said that he is not, that was not a Nazi rally. He is not a Nazi rally. He is not a Nazi yesterday, and he made clear that he was told as a child to never say that, and he rebuffed those. And even going into the rally, he said, we're just trying to make America great again. Although one thing, Vlad, I would point out to you before we go is that all of the speakers, as they took the stage stage in Madison Square Garden kind of either mocked those comparisons or leaned in. Even Hulk Hogan saying, I don't see Nazis here, I just see people who want to make America great again. So there was kind of this flirtation with even those criticisms on Sunday.
All right, Jake Rosen for us in Washington today. Jake, thank you. Meanwhile, Vice President Kamala Harris is preparing to address the country from Washington, D.C. before she hits more battleground states. Her team is trying to pull support from all demographics in the final days of her campaign. She spoke to a new generation of first-time voters at her Michigan rally yesterday. Check it out.
One of the things about it is you are rightly impatient for change. I love that about you. You are impatient for change. Because, look, you have only known the climate crisis and are leading, then, the charge to protect our planet and our future. This is not political for you. It is your lived experience. And I see you. And I see your power.
CBS News campaign reporter Nidia Cavazos is in Washington, where the vice president will make that final appeal in just a few hours. So, Nidia, there had been some consternation amongst Democrats that the language that the vice president was using, which had gotten a lot harsher in recent days, comparing Trump to a fascist, among other things, was going to be pulled back for this speech, that this speech was going to be more about unifying people across different demographics, across even different political persuasions, for example, like Liz Cheney. What are you hearing?
That's exactly what we're hearing from both Harris and her campaign, that tonight is supposed to be a message filled with optimism, as she's going to be calling on American voters to flip the page, to turn the page on this Trump era, on the division, on the hate. And she has promised that her speech tonight is going to be centered around American voters and the issues that most impact them, the issues that are top of mind for them, like the economy, for example, and reproductive rights. And we also know that Harris chose to do this speech, her closing argument, in Washington, D.C., with the White House as a backdrop, as she wants this to be symbolic. She wants to paint the picture for American voters that come January, they can have a picture of who they want to imagine in the Oval Office. They can either see former President Donald Trump there, who she says is going to be working on his enemies list, and she says, or you can have herself in the Oval Office, who's going to be working down her to-do list, her checklist, making sure that she's serving the American public. So that's along the lines of what we're going to be hearing today. And according to the campaign, they're estimating that this is on track to be one of the biggest events for Harris, with more than 20,000 people in attendance tonight.
Nidia, are you hearing about any special guests that will be in attendance at this big speech later this afternoon?
So far, the campaign has let us know that there's going to be a pre-program, but they're not necessarily dropping in names yet. We know that that information is going to be dropped throughout the day, but they do categorize these people as normal people. And of course, this is in reference to what we were seeing from the Trump rally in New York over the weekend.
So let's talk about Donald Trump. He's trying to fan those flames of the offensive comments made by a comedian at his rally in New York City. He's trying to, I don't know if the phrase is he's fanning the flames, as opposed to, at least his campaign is trying to quell the uproar. You've got people who are very influential, Bad Bunny, for example, who are coming out in support of Kamala Harris. And I think for a lot of people in this country, they're waking up to the fact that that Puerto Ricans make up a very, very large percentage of the voting demographic in this country. People may not be aware that once you establish residency in any of the 50 states, if you're Puerto Rican, you can vote. You can vote in this election. And as you know, Nidia, there are, in Pennsylvania and in the state of Florida, the numbers of Puerto Ricans in those states are almost at the level that we have here in New York. And so what does that mean for those folks who might have been on the fence about voting for Donald Trump?
Well, this has been a true political gift for Harris and her campaign. And though Trump and his campaign have said that these jokes were never pre-reviewed by them, and these jokes do not necessarily reflect Trump's sentiment or the campaign sentiment, the reality here is that this situation has helped the Harris campaign. And when we're talking about Latino voters, especially in Pennsylvania, there's a large population of Puerto Rican voters, Latino voters. There's almost 600,000 eligible voters in Pennsylvania, and close to 50% of those live within the Latino corridor, which are the areas surrounding Philadelphia. So we know that this can only further help Harris strengthen inroads within this critical voting group, and especially in this critical voting state, a battleground state. And we know that it's not just in Pennsylvania. You mentioned Florida, for example, and while it isn't a battleground state, there is a very large population of Puerto Rican voters too. And so we've seen them come out against this rhetoric. We've seen newspapers endorsing Harris, and we've seen also newspapers, among the most prominent Spanish language newspapers in the country, also coming out in support of Harris after this situation. So while the Harris campaign was working to mobilize and energize their base and these undecided voters in Pennsylvania, this actually ended up helping them, according to what we're hearing from voters on the ground and from the Harris campaign.
All right, Nidia Cavazos reporting for us. Thank you, Nidia. Washington Post owner and Amazon founder Jeff Bezos has made his first public comment since the paper ended its policy of endorsing a presidential candidate. Bezos defended the decision in an op-ed, writing the endorsements for president, quote, create a perception of bias. He also said there was no quid pro quo of any kind. The Post editorial staff had reportedly prepared an endorsement of Vice President Harris before the paper announced it would no longer make those endorsements. According to NPR, the move sparked backlash, with several Post staffers resigning and more than 200,000 people canceling their subscriptions. And be sure to stay with CBS News for all-day coverage on Election Day. We'll have live reports from our election headquarters in New York and from our team spread out across the country. And remember, special coverage starts at 4 p.m. Eastern right here on CBS News 24/7. This morning, the Lebanese-based Hezbollah militant group has appointed Naim Qassem as its new leader following the killing of Hassan Nasrallah in an Israeli airstrike last month. Meanwhile, Israeli lawmakers have passed laws banning the UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency, or UNRWA, from operating inside its territory despite opposition from key allies, including the United States. Now, all of this comes as fighting in the region continues. At least 93 people are dead or missing after an Israeli airstrike on a building in northern Gaza this morning, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. Our Holly Williams has more.
Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry says that an Israeli strike early this morning hit a 5-story building in Beit Lahia in northern Gaza, where displaced Palestinian families were sheltering. And it says many of those killed were women and children. Israel's military has repeatedly struck buildings for displaced people in Gaza, saying it is carrying out precise strikes targeting militants. Meanwhile, Israel's parliament voted yesterday to bar the United Nations agency that helps Palestinian refugees from operating inside Israel, taking effect in 90 days. Now, that UN agency, known as UNRWA, is the largest provider of aid to Palestinians. Israel is a long-time critic of UNRWA, and earlier this year made a series of allegations, including that several of UNRWA's local Palestinian employees were involved in the October 7th attacks here in Israel, which left around 1,200 people dead. As a result, in March, Congress cut all U.S. funding to UNRWA for a year. Following a UN investigation, the agency sacked 9 staff members who it said may have been involved in the October 7th attacks. Now, for context, UNRWA employs around 13,000 people in Gaza. Israel's vote to bar UNRWA from operating in this country, from where international aid is delivered to Gaza, has been widely criticized, including by several of its allies. The U.S. says it is, quote, deeply concerned. Back to you.
All right, Holly, thank you very much. A brush fire in northeastern Massachusetts has burned around 130 acres with smoke visible from as far as Boston. It started near Salem, where many Halloween tourists are expected this week, and the National Weather Service says recent dry weather has fueled those flames. Salem's fire chief says it's been difficult to put out because of the terrain in the area. The cause of the fire has not yet been determined. Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Kate Bilo with the first look at the national forecast. Kate.
Thanks, Vlad. Well, the forecast today across the nation is a kind of a study in contrast. We've got heavy mountain snow over the Rockies. Out ahead of that storm, though, extreme warmth and very windy conditions across the Central Plains. So here's the breakdown. Again, very windy, very warm from Texas right up through the Central Plains states. That mild air is starting to spill over into the Northeast as well, where some spots could be looking at record high temperatures by Halloween on Thursday. But the big story, the mountain snow across the Rockies states, Colorado up through into Utah, Nevada, and right on into parts of Montana and Wyoming. Temperatures much cooler there, and you can see the warmth out ahead of that storm. We're looking at upper 80s in parts of Texas today, 80s all the way up into the St. Louis area. Taking a look at the current satellite and radar, you can see that storm just kind of getting underway. Rain and heavy mountain snow expected throughout the day today. And we're looking at some totals here across the Rockies with this system in the 12 to 24 inch range. You can see the heaviest snow, of course, in the highest elevations, where over a foot could fall. Coming up, we'll have a look ahead into the Halloween trick-or-treat forecast. For now, Vlad, I'll send it back to you.
All right, Kate Bilo, thank you very much. 2 ballot boxes were set on fire in the Pacific Northwest. After the break, a look at election security just 1 week from Election Day. Stay with us. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. You are looking at live pictures of the podium where former President Donald Trump will hold a press conference this hour before heading to a campaign stop in Pennsylvania. We'll bring this to you live when he begins speaking. Tensions are rising in Europe as the U.S. confirms 10,000 North Korean troops are in Russia and could be used to bolster Russian forces near Ukraine in the coming weeks. NATO Chief Mark Rutte says the move is a significant escalation of the conflict. CBS News Pentagon reporter and producer Ellie Watson is at the Pentagon, where they are closely monitoring the situation. Ellie, thousands of North Korean troops have been inching closer to Ukraine. Where are those North Korean troops headed? And will they be on the front lines helping Russia fight Ukraine?
Yeah, U.S. officials told us that a small number of those North Korean troops are already in the Kursk region, with the expectation that several of those 10,000 will continue to move in that direction over the next several weeks. Kursk, if you remember, is in Russia and where Ukraine launched a surprise offensive in early August with one goal to try and draw Russian forces away from eastern Ukraine. That hasn't really happened in any meaningful way. Russia has continued to claw back territory in Kursk, as well as maintain pressure in eastern Ukraine, but at a significant cost. September 2024, while it was maintaining both of those fronts, was the highest month of Russian casualties over the course of the entire war. Officials here see these North Korean movements as Putin potentially trying to solve the problem of Kursk without suffering even higher Russian casualties and without calling a mass mobilization, which would be very unpopular within Russia.
President Biden is calling the growing tensions very dangerous, Ellie. The Pentagon says that the U.S. is not limiting the use of American weapons, though. Does that mean the U.S. could be supplying Ukrainians with more weapons in the coming days?
The supply chain for this war is very complicated. President Biden has already committed that he will continue to send out those drawdown packages. So those packages of weapons we see about every 2 weeks, of ammunition, of air defense interceptors to Ukraine, no matter if there are North Korean soldiers fighting. But where it gets complicated is the surprising friendships Russia has had to make. North Korea is the first to send troops. North Korea has already provided ammunition containers to Russia, but Iran has also provided missiles and drones to Russia, and China has provided technological support so that Russia can keep building weapons. So the Biden administration likes to call, is calling the North Korean movements an act of desperation by Putin, which is true, but Putin continues to find a way to supply his war of attrition.
All right, Ellie Watson reporting for us this morning. Thank you, Ellie.
Thank you.
The FBI is investigating fires set at 2 ballot drop boxes, one in Vancouver, Washington, and one in nearby Portland, Oregon, which destroyed hundreds of ballots on Monday. So for more on this, I want to bring in CBS News election law expert and political contributor David Becker. David, before I talk about the legal repercussions for attacks at voting sites like this, what happens to those votes of those people who voted?
So right now, what election officials are doing is they're trying to identify those ballots. They can often tell there's still information on the ballots that were destroyed. It appears that a very small number in the Oregon location were destroyed, and maybe more, maybe a couple hundred in the Washington location. Obviously, those voters know whether they dropped them off at that particular date, and there'll be some outreach on that. And voters should know that there's going to be a way to get a duplicate ballot. Fortunately, we're still 7 days out. They can get a second ballot. There's a way to give them a second ballot and ensure that no one gets to vote 2 ballots. There's always a check. They only count the first ballot that comes in. There's also ballot tracking in these states. So they'll be tracked as to when the last time anyone saw them, they were delivered or whatever. So they'll know if, for instance, someone's ballot wasn't destroyed and is still coming in, or someone's ballot has been lost. And so that'll be fixed in some way. So I don't think it's going to have a huge effect on the election, though it's obviously going to be a big problem for these election officials and voters.
Yeah, for sure. And so now, what are the legal repercussions for attacks like this? And I mean, what are election officials doing to ensure that we don't see similar acts of violence like this in the coming days?
These attacks likely violate both federal and state laws. Washington's actually a state that has strengthened its state laws recently with regard to attacks on election sites like this. So I expect that this individual, who clearly is really detached from reality in some way, is going to be caught. They apparently have video. It looks like it might be the same individual at both of these sites. And this person is going to be prosecuted and be looking at very significant jail time and perhaps state and federal prosecutions for these acts. Hopefully there won't be anyone who ruins their life by doing something this sick in any other locations. It's still very sporadic. We've had about 50 million early votes already voted, very few problems, no issues of safety, no issues of lines. These are very, very isolated attacks.
So, I mean, it would be very strange in the United States of America to have, guards or police officers posted at these ballot drop boxes. But could that be something we see in the future?
Well, many of the ballot drop boxes are near an election site. Many of them, if the vast majority, have cameras on them. People should know that. That's how we got video on this particular individual. They're largely safe, and they are being monitored in a variety of ways. If we're at the point where there are people in this country that are willing to destroy their fellow citizens' votes, their voices in this election, we're in a really dangerous point. Like I said, fortunately, it appears very isolated right now. If anyone has any doubts, we're 7 days away, 45 states in D.C. offering early voting right now. You can probably go vote early in person, as I did this past weekend. It was incredibly quick and easy. You can return your mail ballot at this point, I think, put it in a drop box, or if you're a little bit worried about that, take it right to an election office right now. I wouldn't put it in the mail because we're only 7 days away. But voting is going to be safe, easy, and convenient for almost every single voter in this country. We've all seen that over the past few weeks.
All right, David Becker, as always, my friend, thank you very much. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Vlad.
A former police officer who saw some of the most extreme violence on January 6th is now on a campaign blitz for Vice President Harris. We'll tell you what he and his colleagues are saying to voters with just days before Election Day. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Welcome back to CBS News 24/7. Here's a look at some of the top stories we're following this morning. Former top Trump aide Steve Bannon is expected to hold a news conference this afternoon following his release from federal prison in Connecticut this morning. He served 4 months behind bars after a contempt conviction. Bannon defied a congressional subpoena to testify and supply documents to the House committee investigating the Capitol riot. There are new sex assault allegations this morning against music mogul Sean Diddy Combs. 2 new lawsuits filed Monday accuse Combs of assaulting a 10 and 17-year-old boy in separate incidents in the early 2000s. One was a would-be contestant on Combs' reality television series Making the Band. Combs' lawyers deny the latest claims and say it's a publicity stunt by the same lawyer representing other alleged victims. Bob's Burgers voice actor Jay Johnston has been sentenced to a year in prison for his role in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Prosecutors were seeking a longer sentence. Johnston's defense team has maintained that the government has, quote, persistently overstated his role in the attack. Johnston allegedly shoved police who were protecting the Capitol that day with a stolen shield. Now, some of the Capitol police officers who were on the other side of the January 6th insurrection have become surrogates for the Harris-Walz campaign. That includes retired Sergeant Harry Dunn, who has been reminding voters of what he believes is at stake in this election. CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane is right here in the studio with me this morning and joins me now to talk about it. Good to see you. Studio 55, first time here.
It's big.
That's what everybody always says.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about Harry Dunn. What's his message?
At this point, with 7 days until the election, it's really all hands on deck. You know, spouses are campaigning, surrogates, running mates, former presidents. At this point, they're bringing Harry Dunn in because he has traction with a number of people who care about democracy, care about democratic politics, care about this particular race, because Harry Dunn gained his prominence, Vlad, as somebody who testified before America at the House January 6th Select Committee. Millions of people watched that testimony. He has used that to sculpt a public platform and profile, pro-democracy, anti-insurrection, which has some resonance as Donald Trump still faces a January 6th related charge, and 1,500 Americans have been prosecuted for their roles in January 6th. Some of them believe Trump will be back and should get some type of retribution.
So he's not the only one, Harry Dunn, who's been vocal in the final weeks of campaigning. What are some of the other voices you're hearing from?
Another retired Capitol Police figure, Sergeant Aquilino Gonell, who also testified at those committee hearings. Gonell is being deployed strategically. He's actually cut an ad supporting Vice President Harris and her running mate Tim Walz. Gonell also is being deployed, Vlad, into Latino American districts. Think about Pennsylvania. Think about areas where his message will resonate. He is bilingual, and he's using that as a way to gather followers for Vice President Harris. But here's how you know it's working, because other campaigns are adopting this. There are congressional candidates calling them in, and they do draw a crowd. There's a message that resonates because they're not politicians.
Right.
They're civil servants, retired law enforcement officers. They bring a different type of credibility.
So you know this, Scott. You were there. More than 140 officers were injured during the January 6th insurrection. The heroes out there are still begging voters to remember their stories, which is kind of remarkable that police officers who typically, specifically when you talk about Republicans, tend to, quote unquote, back the blue. And in this particular case, when you ask Republican members of Congress or supporters of Donald Trump about those incidents, I thought it was telling. The last time the president spoke about this, former President Donald Trump spoke about this, he said we, meaning the crowd, did not perform acts of violence. Of course, those police officers beg to differ.
A couple things there. He said we didn't bring guns, aligning himself with rioters, some of whom very much did have guns that day. But he also said nobody died that day, other than one of the members of the mob. 4 police officers died by suicide in the days after January 6th, and they were deemed official line-of-duty deaths. That type of thing resonates with some number of Americans, and the Harris-Walz campaign is using these 2 police officers, these former police officers, both of whom were injured that day, to try to amplify that message.
Scott, it's good to have you here in studio, because I know you and others are slowly coming into the CBS News Broadcast Center, where we'll be covering the election going forward from today until we get a winner next week.
You're stuck with us, man.
I mean, nothing better, nothing better. Good to see you, my brother, especially here in Studio 55. All right, growing focus on another potentially critical battleground state. That is the state of Pennsylvania. Donald Trump is the favorite for many Keystone State voters, but the Harris campaign is hoping the math could still swing in its favor. Correspondent Jared Hill has more from Beaver County.
You know, the thought is that the road to the White House leads through Pennsylvania, and this is a battleground where the road to victory is going to rely on one of these candidates being able to pull enough people from the margins of the other party. Take Beaver County, for example. This is a Republican stronghold. There's no real question around whether former President Trump will win this county in particular, but the question for the Harris campaign is if she can lose by less and maintain in the cities and the suburbs around those cities like Pittsburgh as well as Philadelphia to be able to make the math work for her. We've been talking to some voters who are out here and they say one of the big issues for them is the tone of politics at this point, whether it is from former President Trump or Vice President Harris saying that they want folks to focus on policy. This is the last day of early voting here in Pennsylvania, and so this is going to be a moment that we're seeing a lot of folks coming to the polling places, trying to cast their ballots before Election Day. And then the big day again, November 5th, is going to be when all bets are off, and both of the candidates as well as all the folks here are hoping that their vote will lead to victory. Reporting in Beaver County, I'm Jared Hill.
All right, Jared, thank you. More than 47 million people in 47 states have already voted in the presidential election, and many of those ballots came from Arizona. That is a battleground state that will decide the winner. The people who print those ballots say they use extraordinary security methods to protect the integrity of the voting process, and Chris Van Cleve managed to get a closer look.
This is the sound of democracy being printed, sorted, stuffed, and shipped. From inside this secure facility with armed guards near the Phoenix airport, Runbeck Election Services is printing ballots for voters in 9 states, including Arizona.
How many ballots do you print? For the general election, we'll print about 35 million ballots.
Jeff Ellington runs the place.
By the second, third week of September, we've got enough files in that we're printing, we're starting to fold and insert.
Is this stretch of time your Super Bowl?
That's a great way to describe it. It is the Super Bowl. Everything comes together.
By the time voting ends on November 5th, they'll go through about 6,000 miles of paper, printing up to 1.5 million ballots a day, enough to fill 51 semis. So many ballots, they weigh about the same as 2 747s.
We don't overprint anything, so every step as we go through, we print exactly what the county's asked for.
And every single ballot is tracked throughout the process.
And it's also taking a picture of each envelope and checking the thickness so we can make sure we have all the pieces accounted for.
What's to stop someone from copying one of your ballots?
It's got to be on the right paper. The tolerances to cut a ballot are shockingly tight. I mean, there are 3 decimal places, and it's not 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper.
The kind, thickness, and color of the paper can vary by the machine tabulating the ballot, which varies by county. So does the design and layout of the ballot itself.
States all across the country have paper ballots. 95% of all voters, including all of the voters in all of the swing states, will vote on paper ballots. Those paper ballots are auditable. They are verifiable.
Beyond ballots, Runbeck offers support services for elections in 21 other states and the District of Columbia.
We recently started selling panic buttons to counties because of all the threats to poll workers. Counties had voiced, hey, we're trying to find a way to solve this problem.
How many panic buttons have you sold?
We're right around 1,000 to different counties.
It's a lot of panic buttons.
There's a lot of concern.
It really is crunch time inside this facility right now. They're running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, printing, sorting, packing these ballots. They want to get them out the door, in the mail, and to you when you need them.
One of those ballots found its way to Georgina Caruso in Buckeye, Arizona.
Did you know the ballot is printed here in Arizona?
I would hope so.
We met her as she was about to drop her ballot off at a polling place. Didn't want to risk it getting lost in the mail.
I mean, I did it for myself. You know, I chose what I thought was good for me.
And while Election Day means the end of Runbeck's busiest stretch, it also marks the start of runoff season and the need to crank up those sounds of democracy to ready brand new ballots all over again. For CBS Mornings, I'm Chris Van Cleve in Phoenix.
All right, Chris, thanks. I want to send it back over to CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Kate Bilo with another look at the national forecast. Kate.
Thank you, Vlad. Well, the heat continues across the country's midsection. Let's pull up our map of the nation here, and I want to show you just how warm it is today. Temperatures getting to the mid-80s in spots like Little Rock, Wichita, St. Louis at 83 degrees. There's that surge of warmth. Meanwhile, we've got very cold air over the Rockies where a snowstorm is underway today. So let's take a look at what to expect. All this heat, by the way, is spreading eastward, and many spots along the East Coast may experience record high temperatures in time for trick-or-treat on Thursday. Let's talk about right now, though. You can see rain and mountain snow kind of getting underway here across the Rocky states, where some spots will pick up over a foot of snowfall in the highest elevations through today and into tonight. That is what's kind of generating this surge of heat across portions of the southern plains, with temperatures surging well into the 80s, near 90 today. But it is going to cool down as we get into the next couple of days as that cooler air and a strong cold front cuts across the center part of the country. So the heat on notice, it's only going to be around for another day or two. Taking a look at your trick-or-treat forecast, this is where we could see some record highs broken in the east as the heat shifts. New York City, 81. That's also the record that was set back in 1946. Here in Philadelphia, we're looking to break a record of 82 degrees, and look how warm it is for the trick-or-treaters. They don't need the coats under the costumes this year, but as we head out to the west, that's where things get a little dicey. The parade of storms continues. Even though the snow will be over and the sun is back across portions of Colorado, Utah, and Nevada, we're looking at another chance for rain as yet another system moves onshore from the Pacific, and that could bring the need for umbrellas for some across the Northwest. On Halloween, it stays cool but comfortable across the Southwest. Vlad, I'll send it back over to you.
All right, Kate Bilo, thank you very much. McDonald's appears to be winning back some customers with a better than expected third quarter earnings report. But the impact of the E. coli outbreak is still to come. Details after the break. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Fast food giant McDonald's reported its third quarter results this morning, and revenue came in at around $6.9 billion, beating Wall Street expectations, and same-store sales in the U.S. increased by 0.3%. CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady joins me again here in Studio 55 to discuss. All right, so let's talk about what these results tell you about how McDonald's is performing, Kelly.
So I like to think of this as the beauty of low expectations, right? So you see them beat Wall Street's expectations, but the bar was low. I like to think of McDonald's as kind of a bellwether for that lower income consumer. You've seen them really struggle getting those folks in the door. That's why they've had all of those discounts that brought back the Happy Meal and whatnot. So same store sales, you mentioned it rose. What that means is people spent more at the same store quarter over quarter, excuse me, Vlad. But less people came in the door. And so what is concerning here is what that tells me is, okay, yeah, people are willing to go in and they're willing to spend, but only if there's a good deal. And then you bring in the E. coli piece of this. Right. And there's just been a drop-off in foot traffic, which could be really problematic for the fourth quarter.
I was going to say, we're not going to know the effects of that E. coli hit until next quarter, right?
Exactly.
And we can see, I mean, look, they did the right thing. They recalled those onions. They stopped selling those quarter pounders, but those effects could be felt much later.
Yes, and think about the brand part of it, right? Yeah. If you're someone who's like, okay, am I going to go to Wendy's? Am I going to go to McDonald's? You're thinking, I want to get my, Taco Bell. All right, we'll go up for Mexican after
exactly.
this. That could just kind of make you say, like, nah, I'm going to go to Taco Bell instead of McDonald's.
Okay, so speaking of spending money, consumer confidence, let's talk about that. There's a new report out this morning. What did it say?
Consumers are more optimistic about the economy. So this is an index. Basically, any reading above 100 tells you that people are positive about the economy right now and for the next 6 months. Came in at 108.7. The other piece of it, the little nugget, the double click, is the expectations index. Came in above 80, well above 80, 89. Why is 80 important? That's sort of the metric where you start to get the butterflies of, ooh, a recession is coming. The tea leaves here, why does this matter? 70% of our economic activity is consumer spending. So if people don't feel comfortable about the economy, they're not going to go out and spend. So this is good. The other tea leaves, right? VP Harris, she is currently responsible for this economy as well as President Biden. Right. So you could say, well, this is a good thing. The other thing people are starting to say is, well, maybe people are pricing in a former President Trump win, and they're saying, oh, well, maybe things will be looking better. So it's kind of, you could look at it both ways.
Right, but it feels like, one of the things that we've been talking about over the last quarter is that the economy is strong, the economy is getting stronger, and yet people aren't feeling that when they go to the gas pump, or they're not feeling that when they hit the grocery stores. What is that disconnect?
It's how much money you're making, right? So we had inflation. I mean, over the past few years, the eggs, everything, car insurance is up. And yes, inflation is coming down, but the rate of inflation is coming down. Right. So your prices are still rising, but then when you think about where you were a few years ago before we had this inflation crisis, your wages haven't kept up.
That's right.
And so that's the disconnect where you're saying, wait, hold on a second. This used to buy me so much more at the grocery store, and I just can't handle it.
Can't handle that because my wages aren't increasing at the same rate of inflation. Exactly. Kelly O'Grady, always great to have you in studio. Keep coming back. We love having you. All right. Let's talk some baseball now. Kelly, you a baseball fan? Really? Okay, because I'm not. But the Dodgers took a commanding 3-0 lead over the Yankees in the World Series. A recap of last night's Game 3 is next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Millions of Gen Xers, no, not Gen Xers, Gen Zers, oh boy, will exercise their right to vote for the first time this year, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. Youth voter turnout in presidential elections is on the rise. I love Gen Z. I love Gen Z. CBS News' Nancy Chen has more on this.
At first glance, Penn State students Ryan Klein and Baybars Charkas seem to have a lot in common.
We talk about our lives, our roommates, gossip, what normal friends talk about. Yeah.
I mean, you even dressed alike.
Right, yeah, that's right. Totally unintentionally.
That is, until you start talking politics.
I'm the president of the College Republicans.
And I'm the president of the College Democrats.
here in the battleground state of Pennsylvania, where former President Trump and Vice President Harris are neck and neck. These two college seniors are putting participation over party.
On Penn State's campus, and I imagine many others, there's not a very good relationship between people who are very partisan. We wanted to break that trend.
41 million Gen Zers will be eligible to vote in this year's presidential election, 8 million of them for the very first time. But turnout will be key. In 2022, only about 30% of 18-year-olds registered to vote.
You don't need residency to vote here.
In both presidential elections and midterms, voter turnout among 18 to 24-year-olds has been far below any other age group since the 1960s. But today's youngest voters make up a quarter of the population, enough to tip the scales come November.
It's all about turnout,
says Stacey Rosenberg, who teaches policy at Carnegie Mellon University.
Young people need to remember that it doesn't matter how many social media posts they make or how many protests that they attend. If they don't actually show up to vote, their voice won't be heard.
According to a recent study, 66% of 18 to 24-year-olds associate with the Democratic Party, compared with 34% who align with the GOP. But said issues like jobs, abortion, and education drive them to the polls, not party.
Younger voters often don't feel very positive about the future, and that's just the reality of being an adolescent.
Penn State senior Fee Montany is voting in her first presidential election.
Do you think that politicians understand you and your generation?
Straight up, no. I think we are just so different as a generation, and we know what matters to us, and we're not tying it to just one candidate. We're critiquing a candidate while also appreciating the things that they do.
Let's talk about passion versus politics.
Yeah.
How do you approach both?
I've become kind of like the nonpartisan spokesperson almost, where I just really want everyone to, have their vote.
With the election now just weeks away, Klein and Charkis hope their partnership can set an example from this college campus all the way to Washington, D.C.
Ultimately, is there something that people can learn from your experiences and your friendship?
We're all citizens first, and so I think we need to put that hat on rather than just being a Republican or a Democrat.
Salute.
A new way of thinking for old friends. For Eye on America, Nancy Chen, State College, Pennsylvania.
Come on, Gen Z. All right, just one game. That's all the Los Angeles Dodgers need to clinch the World Series title after beating the Yankees last night and taking a 3-0 series lead. Dodgers first baseman Freddie Freeman homered for the third consecutive game. A late rally by the Yankees fell short. What? Didn't fall short? Bad, right? Bad. They couldn't make it. They couldn't close the deal, and it's bad news for Yankees fans. Historically, a team that has fallen behind 3-0 in the World Series has never come back to win the title. Game 4 is tonight in New York. What are the chances? What do you guys think? What do you think? Not going to happen? They're going to win tonight. Somebody says they're going to win tonight. All right, we're hoping for that. Let's go Yankees. Meanwhile, let's go former President Trump. We're still waiting for a press conference from the former president at Mar-a-Lago. There you see live pictures. Look, he's been showing up 2-3 hours late to his rallies. I do not expect that he will be here in the next minute, but stick around. You're going to want to stick around with us because if he shows up in the next 30 seconds, we're going to bring it to you live right here on CBS News 24/7. In the meantime, that does it for me. But stay right where you are, because after the break, we're going to have Elizabeth Cook live from San Francisco. We're still awaiting. Do we have that live shot of former President Trump at Mar-a-Lago? There it is. He's in Palm Beach, Florida. Mar-a-Lago. That's where it's happening. That's where it's all going down. I don't hear YMCA yet. What's his walk-on music? Macho Man. Born to be an American. That's his closeout music, Berlin, not his walk-on music. His walk-on music is Macho Man, YMCA, Can't Get No Satisfaction.
Can't always get what you want.
Which one?
Can't always get what you want.
Oh yeah, you can't always get what you want. So as soon as you hear that music, you know he's coming out. But folks, we're going to keep an eye out on this because we do expect that the former president, if he doesn't take any questions, will certainly be shouted out. In other words, reporters will ask questions from where they are seated to ask about those inflammatory remarks that were made at Madison Square Garden at his rally over the weekend. His campaign has responded. The former president, though, has yet to apologize or say anything about it. So we'll keep an eye out. All right, Elizabeth Cook coming up next.